He thought about it for a second and surprised me again. Hey, let me see a mag. Oversaturated with reading the situation, someone on autopilot, I took one of my AR mags out of my pouch and handed it to him without thinking. He accepted the mag and moved it up and down in his hand, feeling the gravity. Those guys would have never let me hold one of their mags. He was referring to the bad guys. I responded, yeah, well, we aren't them. He nodded and said, most of them are out of bullets also. He put his hand out to shake my hand. I took my glove off and we shook. He could have crushed my hand to dust, but instead respectfully matched my pressure. Your team could have taken us out and didn't, he mentioned rhetorically. I nodded grimly. That seemed to be enough for him. He got up and I got up and he opened the door and I walked out and he followed. He escorted me back to the crew quarters in silence. He opened the door and I went in first and he followed. Guys, get out here with me for a second, he said to the guys. I stayed inside and they all filed out, wondering what had happened. All my guys started talking to me at once and I shut them up. The bad guys have a QRT coming. The oil rig guys thought we were the QRT, which is why you guys got ambushed and they won out. Everyone facepalmed or sighed. Yeah, it was just miscommunication. Sorry I wasn't here earlier to resolve it. Yeah, well, we tried to tell them. I didn't roll my eyes because it would have hurt, but I shushed the guy who said that instead. In moments, the oil rig team came back in a little bit more humbled and less like they were going to grind everyone in the room's bones into dust. Their leader only had one question. Okay, what's the plan? Chapter 12. The new plan. Early morning. Day 2. I had my backpack and AR off in a corner of the conference room along with my hoodie all drying. I was in my t-shirt and cargo pants, which were drying out pretty quick in the warm room. It wasn't musty as the dehumidifier worked to take the excess moisture out of the air. We were fine-tuning a plan which was going to involve acting like they had captured us. The storm raging outside, but expected to calm down within the next few hours. The storm raged outside. We barely felt the storm on the giant rig, but I imagined our patrol vessel getting tossed and turned like crazy. I was very glad we weren't inside it. I wasn't looking forward to the odds, though. He said it was going to be another 12 to 13 man team. They hadn't hailed the civilization side of the rig in a while, and they probably weren't going to. They were probably going to come unannounced as far as the rig workers were concerned. We'd rounded up the rest of the rig's security team and locked them up on our ship. They hadn't even known that was what was going on. A testament to how good the oil rig team had done at subverting their camera system, I suppose. It was only the typical 5-man security team they leave behind, and they had no bullets. They weren't able to raise any additional alarms as far as I could tell, and were easily overwhelmed. They were apparently the ones that raised the initial alarm, though. We had 3 of our guys down in their security office monitoring comms and cameras. The local rig workers wanted to keep an eye on us anyway, which was fine. Building trust with them was important. We were connected on internal radios and back to our own usual channels, so we would immediately know if anything happened. We sat down for a mini planning session and agreed that the storm would keep the quick reaction team in the shallows for at least a few hours. Unfortunately, that cut us off as well. The workers couldn't fuel up our ship with the partially refined oil because the seas were too bad. That meant escape wasn't really an option. Escape hadn't been part of the plan either, so we kept talking and the oil guys shared rations with us. That was very nice, everyone thought. Their story seemed to be similar to the prior groups of workers that we had liberated. Everything starting off as we'd heard so many times. Their families got taken hostage. As long as everyone kept working, the families were fine. The oil rig workers hadn't got new updates on their families in a few months, due to us liberating the families in a prior op, so they decided to do something about it. Unfortunately, that something involved taking us hostage on accident instead of the bad guy security team. We didn't have the heart to tell them that the bad guys wouldn't negotiate for one of their quick response teams. We left it alone because at least they were trying to do something. I imagine they thought maybe they would overtake the guards and then the quick team. Then they'd take off and try to find their families with the commandeered ship and then disappear. Without training in numbers, they would have taken an ugly trade and we'd get screwed it up. We would have screwed it up anyway. This worked heavily in their favor, though. We proposed a workable plan that accommodated their situation, though. This included the ability that some of them could stay, as they ended up wanting to. We didn't see a problem with that, and it worked in our original plan anyway. They could come and go whenever they wanted. There was plenty of room on the rig for their families, or vice versa, whatever. We told them they were welcome in any of our strongholds due to the work that they'd been doing. Some of them wanted to move out to the Pacific Northwest. Some wanted to move away from the Pacific Northwest completely. Some just wanted to stand on land for the first time in ages. One of our big questions was why there wasn't tons of cars on the road. They explained that even though the rig was nearly operational before the collapse, it had been abandoned and needed some work. They just got their first few boatloads of partial crude oil, and the workers were tired of getting strung along, but the bad guys always wanted more from them. So here we were. We didn't think we'd have a new plan worked out so we can distribute the oil. We think we have a new plan worked out so we can distribute the oil that they approved of. They didn't want to give us the oil just to tip the balance of power. We explained that very little of the oil was going to us. Most of the oil was going directly back into agriculture. We were about everyone being free and safe and secure and the leaders of their own destiny. The oil rig workers liked this, and it reminded them of how everything was initially supposed to be. Someone brought up the point of how it would be some kind of controlled communism. But how is that slightly better than the current totalitarianism? But we disagreed. Everyone would be essentially providing food to the hubs for their fuel. We explained to the workers how everyone was already bringing food to the hubs for trade. This would just help make it easier. They hadn't realized we already had a semi-functioning society, so they saw how that all played into the barter system. The workers would get food and some of the oil for their own use, and everyone would just keep bartering and trading like normal, just easier. Cars on the highways would still be virtually non-existent because everyone would be expected to stay local, like how it used to be. If they wanted to go longer distances, they needed to wait for a caravan, so it was affordable and appropriate. The easiest way to get around was from hub to hub anyway, but that unfortunately took about a month to get around in the afflicted areas if you used that method. This way everyone would get to a central place with a few hub hops and then take mass transit to the closest area they wanted to go to. Those vehicles would be guarded by a brand new highway patrol that had unflinching authority on the highways. Basically hundreds of moderately aligned motorcyclists that were going to get deputized to clean up all the roadblocks, traps, clear the overpasses, things like that. The old rig workers asked about the big cities. We talked a little bit about the city-states, but not much. We said that they were expected to stay in their cities if they were going to cause trouble. They hated cars anyway and wanted everything to be on foot and bicycle traffic so bad that they weren't going to get any fuel. It kept them out of everyone's hair anyway and let them live in the perverse utopia they always wanted. We told the oil workers that the city folk could return to the rest of society whenever they found humility, but it had been over 2 years and no such luck. Nobody was holding their breath. The oil workers told us that they were expecting the oil to go to the city-states to start wiping us all out. They said they'd even heard a little chatter about it. We all nodded. That story pretty much aligned with everything else we'd got for intel. After everyone had said their piece, we ended up talking for a few hours. We'd come to a new agreement about a portion of the crew staying and working on the oil. They said they'd train up some other people so they could rotate out and have a fair schedule. Right now they were working 16 or more hours a day, 7 days a week. They'd get time off this way and new people trained and everything would be fine. Someone notified us that the storm was starting to clear up. I guess they had some pretty good Doppler systems on board, which made sense. Also, they had explained that they were partially refining the oil, not just to run the oil rigs back and forth, but because that's the oil. Not just to run the oil container ships back and forth, but because that's what ran the rig also. That cleared up quite a bit of confusion in our group that was new to a scale this massive. The rig workers had asked us about refinery on land, and we told them we couldn't tell them much right this second, but that if someone would rather work at the refinery, that it can be arranged.